Welcome to another video on the C programming video series for the beginners. In this video, we will talk about the size modifiers, which are used along with the integer types in C programming language. In the previous tutorials, we have seen how we can create and use integer variables in our program. We have to specify the int keyword, and then we have to give a name for the variable, and then we can store the value in that variable. Generally, when we talk about the integer type of variable, 4 bytes of memory is used. Now, in a tutorial about the size of operator, we have seen how to check the number of bytes used for storing a specific type of variable. Now, when we write the programs, we work with all kinds of numbers. Sometimes the numbers are smaller, sometimes the numbers are larger. Now, when we try to store a particular value in a variable, as a programmer, we have to make sure that that variable is capable enough of storing that value. For example, for this integer variable number, 4 bytes of memory is allocated. So when a specific number of bytes are allocated for a type of variable, there is a range of values that we can store in that variable. If we try to store a value which is beyond that range, then we get improper results. So as a programmer, it's our duty to make sure that the variables are large enough to store the value that we are trying to store. At the same time, as a programmer, we have to make sure that we are not wasting the memory. For example, let us say in our program, we are trying to store the age of a user. So I will define the integer variable age and I will store a value of 30. Now, when I say I want to store the age of a user in this age variable, I know that this value will not be a large number. It will be a smaller number. So for this, 4 bytes of memory, which is generally allocated for integer data type, is not required. If you think about it in terms of the boxes, then in order to store a pen, we don't have to use a fridge box. For storing a pen, we can have a small pen box. And similarly, in a pen box, we can't store a fridge. So as a programmer, we have to make sure that the variable has enough memory to store the value that we are trying to store in that variable. This is where the size modifiers are used with integers in C programming language. For example, for this age variable, I know that the value that I'm going to store will be a smaller number, and that's why 4 bytes of memory is not required. If we use 4 bytes of memory, then it will be waste of space. And also sometimes we have to write the programs which has to run with limited memory storage. And in that case, we can't afford to waste any storage. So here, the value that I'm going to store in this age variable is not a large number, and that's why 4 bytes of memory, which is generally allocated for integers, is not required. So less number of bytes can be allocated. In order to mention that, we can use this keyword short just before the data type int here. So we will write short int. Generally, when we have the short int, 2 bytes of memory is allocated. So here, this age variable is of type integer, but it will be allocated smaller number of bytes. As a programmer, I should be aware of this, and I should not try to store a value which is beyond the capability of this age variable. Now, after that, we have the integer variables. Generally 4 bytes of memory is allocated. What if we have to work with a number, and in order to store that number, more than 4 bytes are required? In that case, we can use long integers. We use the keyword long before the int keyword, and then we can give the name for the variable. For example, I will say long number. And here in this variable, I can store the value. Now, generally for long integers, depending on the system configuration, 4 or 8 bytes of memory is allocated. And then we have long integers in order to use them, we specify long int, and I will say long number. And for this long integers, at least 8 bytes of memory is allocated in the computers. So here in this long integer, I can store a larger integer value, something like this. So in C programming language, these size modifiers are used in order to define the integer variables of varying size. Now the next thing is how we can display the values on the screen. Here we will use the printf function, and here in order to display the value of this short int type, we use the format specifier %hd. So here I will say age and then %hd, and then I will insert a new line, and then I will refer the age variable here, which is of type short int. Now here this h indicates that it is of type short int, and this d indicates that the value is a signed number. It can be positive or negative. Now similarly for integers, we use the format specifier %d, which we have seen in the previous tutorials. And then for displaying the long integer, we use the format specifier %ld. Here this L mentions that it is a long integer, D indicates that it is a signed number. So here we will say long number. And similarly, in order to display the long integer, we use the format specifier %lld. Okay, just like this. Now I will save this program and I will run this. We get the output here. Now here in the previous tutorial about the signed and unsigned, I have said that if we don't specify unsigned, then by default for integer type, signed is used. So all these variables are signed variables, which means they can contain positive number, negative number, or 0. Now if you want to make them unsigned, then all you have to do is you have to use the keyword unsigned, just like this. So here I'm gonna make all these variables unsigned now. And when we have the unsigned integers, for the format specifier, instead of D, we use U. So it will be %hu for short int, then %u for integer, %lu for long integer, %llu for long integer. If I save this program and if I run this, we get the output here. So here, if we don't mention the unsigned keyword, then they will be signed variables. Now the next thing is, since all these size modifiers are used only with the integer data type, when we use the size modifiers, we don't have to mention the int data type. For example, here instead of saying short int, I can directly say short age. Similarly, instead of long int, I can say long and then the variable name, long number. Similarly, long int, I can remove this int, so it will be long and then the variable name. So you can write the code like this. And again here you can use the unsigned keyword. So it can be like unsigned short age. It means that this age variable is of type short integers and it will contain unsigned number. Now depending on the value that you try to store in your program, you can use all these combination. Now the last thing that we see in this particular video is, what if I mention unsigned and then the variable name? For example, let us say roll number. So I will mention a value of, let us say 11 in this. So here, what is the data type of this? It will be integer. So when we use only unsigned and then the variable name, it will be of type integer. And similarly, you can use the signed here also. So if you use the signed keyword and you do not mention any size modifier or the data type. By default, it will take integer. So this is it guys for this particular video. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you don't like it, hit the dislike button. If you have anything to say, write that in the comment box. For more tutorials, subscribe to the channel.